Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Martello. We are going to continue going through our lesson for section 9.1. So we are going to look at the quotient property of square roots. So the quotient property of square roots says that the square root of a quotient equals the quotient of the square roots of the numerator and the denominator. So just like how we saw with the product property, the quotient property allows us to take a fraction that's underneath the radical and separate it so that the numerator can have its own radical and the denominator can have its own radical. So instead of it being radical or the square root of 3 over 4, we can make it the square root of 3 over the square root of 4, and then we can simplify the numbers that are perfect squares, giving us this answer of square root of 3 over 2. We're going to look at some examples. So this is example 2. We're going to look at part A first. We have the square root of 15 over 64. First, we're going to use the quotient property of square roots and basically split this up. Say it's the square root of 15 over the square root of 64. Then we want to simplify anything that we can. First, if I look at the square root of 15, there are no perfect square factors inside of 15, so I cannot simplify it. But the square root of 64 is a perfect square, so I can take the square root of 64. This gives me the square root of 15 over 8, and that's my answer. I can't simplify it anymore. Let's take a look at the second example for B. We have the square root of 81 over x squared. The first thing we're going to do is use the quotient property and basically split it up. Give 81 its own square root and x squared its own square root. Now I'm going to take the square root of both of these. 81 is a perfect square and x squared is a perfect square. So let's take the square root of each one and I get 9 over x. And that's my answer. Let's look at 2 more examples just like this, and let's listen to big ideas explain them.
Simplify each expression. Part A, the square root of the quantity 11 divided by 36. First, use the quotient property of square roots. The quotient property of square roots says that the square root of a quotient equals the quotient of the square roots of the numerator and the denominator. So the square root of the quantity 11 divided by 36 equals the square root of 11 divided by the square root of 36. Because the square root of 36 equals 6, the expression simplifies to the square root of 11 divided by 6. Part B, the square root of the quantity 144 divided by n squared. First, use the quotient property of square roots. The square root of the quantity 144 divided by n squared equals the square root of 144 divided by the square root of n squared. Because the square root of 144 equals 12 and the square root of n squared equals n, the expression simplifies to 12 divided by n.